He was a hard-working father surrounded by the people he loved most.
His world revolved around his kids.
Until a bitter rivalry turned his quiet suburban neighborhood into a battleground.
This feud was escalating and escalating.
Police had been called to the neighborhood multiple times as a result of this dispute.
These people fuck with me and fuck with me, fuck with me.
But was it an act of self-defense or a preemptive strike?
Officers at crime scenes are accustomed to seeing carnage, but in this case, it truly looked like a war zone.
September 3rd, 2012. It's Labor Day weekend in the small town of Titusville, Florida.
Titusville, here in Brevard County, it's sort of a throwback city. It feels like you're driving into the 60s.
It's equal parts rural, but very much part of the Kennedy Space Center. So there are a lot of engineers, a lot of very well-educated.
But the typically quiet holiday is about to come to a terrifying end. Just after midnight, Titusville police get a report of shots fired in a suburban neighborhood.
911, what's the emergency? Everyone's being shot outside. I need someone here now. My husband's outside bleeding to death. My husband went outside and I'm inside and there's shots going off everywhere. I need someone here. Okay, my doors are locked. Help on the way.
The caller's name is Carrie Blake, and she's calling about her husband, Bruce.
Officers who arrive at crime scenes are accustomed to seeing carnage, but in this case, it truly looked like a war zone. All of this chaos was occurring on a driveway between two homes.
He's alone, which has to be a very intense situation for an officer arriving under those circumstances. He doesn't know at this point who the good guys, who the bad guys are.
The two houses belong to the Blakes and their neighbors, Gary Hembry and Roger Pichor. All three men have been shot.
Mr. Hembry and Mr. Pichor were both lying in their own front yard. Mr. Blake, I believe, was lying in his driveway.
While the officer secures the area, paramedics tend to the wounded. Bruce Blake and Roger Pichor are immediately rushed to the hospital. The third victim isn't as lucky.
Gary Hembry died at the scene. He was shot multiple times, and one of those shots was an execution-style bullet right to the head.
Gary Hembry was born in Cincinnati, Ohio in 1973.
He was exactly what I wanted. I wanted a brown-eyed boy, and that's what I got. He was happy all the time. He loved to eat. He was funny. He had the funniest personality. God, he was just a sweetheart. He just really was a sweetheart.
At the age of 3, his grandmother died, and so the entire family said, you know what, let's move, let's get a fresh start. And so they picked Titusville, Florida.
After high school, Gary got a job as a plumber's assistant and looked forward to starting a family of his own. He got married and had 2 boys. But by 2002, he found himself divorced with primary custody of the kids.
I would say he was one of the best fathers that I could have asked for. He did everything he could for us. You know, money might not have been there, but it didn't matter. We still managed to live our best life.
In 2003, Gary became a father again to a little girl named Destiny. Though he and the mother didn't stay together, they shared custody of their daughter.
Gary was someone who loved a lot of company. He loved all the children playing in the yard. He loved having friends over. It almost seemed like there was never a quiet moment at his house.
The Hembry household became even more crowded in 2012 when Gary's new girlfriend Kim moved in with her children.
I believe it was like March when she moved into the house, and she had twin girls and she had a son, but the son lived with his father, but came there on the weekends.
I had one sister, one brother, me and my dad, his girlfriend and his kids, and we would just always have our friends constantly over, but it's what we like, so we lived with it. It was normal.
But as far as Gary was concerned, there was always room for one more.
Gary and Roger, I guess they had been friends probably 16 years. He was supposed to move into these apartments and it wasn't quite ready yet, so he had already gave notice where he lived. So Gary told him to put his stuff in storage and stay there.
Roger had kids. He was a funny guy. He liked to mess around a lot. He was kind of like redneckish.
And when Gary landed a job in construction at the Kennedy Space Center, it seemed like that year was destined to be the best of his life.
As Gary approached his 39th birthday, it seemed like he had everything. All his kids around him, a new girlfriend, and a new job, one that seemed like the job of a lifetime.
He got a job out at the Kennedy Space Center. He was so excited. He just had all these plans.
But a month later, Gary Hembry would be gunned down in his driveway, leaving Florida police wondering what happened. Coming up, a backyard barbecue turns into a bloodbath.
He had evidence of bullets all over in front of the two houses, shell casings everywhere.
Roger Pichor and Bruce Blake have been airlifted to hospitals after an unidentified shooter opened fire in their neighborhood. The third victim, 39-year-old Gary Hembry, is dead.
He had evidence of bullets, all over the area, all over in front of the two houses, shell casings everywhere. There were cars in both driveways. You had evidence of projectile damage to both vehicles. You had multiple wounds to each victim.
Investigators were able to determine quite a bit from just the shell casings alone. As it turned out, he fired a 9mm Beretta, and he had reloaded several times.
The Beretta had a 15-round capacity clip. He already had a round into the chamber and 15 rounds in the clip, 16 rounds there. He then reloaded with a second clip of 15 rounds. So you had a total of 31 rounds expended.
Someone had turned this neighborhood cookout into a shooting gallery. But who was he? And why?
Over the course then of the night, detectives arrived, crime scene people arrived, and the full-blown investigation was undertaken.
When police first arrive on the scene, the thing they discover is that the two families had been having a barbecue.
There was definitely my dad, his girlfriend, Roger's girlfriend, Roger's son, Roger's stepson, and a couple of their friends. I was at my mom's house, and my sister was with her mom, and my brother was staying the night at his friend's house.
They started the cookout like 4:30 or so.
Also in attendance were Bruce and Carrie Blake.
The Blakes were relatively new to the neighborhood. They had just moved in earlier that year.
The two victims' homes are on the same frontage street here, Smith. Hembry and Pichor lived here, and then the next house over to that was Bruce Blake's house.
The families tell police that as the evening went on, the party had grown louder.
This was quite the party. It lasted 8 hours long, so you can imagine some of the neighbors might have been a little bit annoyed. Then came midnight, all hell broke loose.
Roger Pichor was the first victim.
Mr. Pichor and his son, Justin, 15-year-old, had been sitting on the tailgate of a pickup truck in front of their residence, talking about fishing, had then gotten up and started walking toward the residence. That was the first shot. right in front of Justin, and he saw his father go down.
I wouldn't even want to know how it was to be there and having to see your dad get shot.
Bruce Blake would be the next victim. Totally caught off guard. He probably didn't even realize what hit him.
Mr. Blake, as I understand it, was shot in his own driveway. After he was shot, he still managed to crawl a little ways.
Hearing the shots, Gary Hembry had stepped out of his house and into a hail of gunfire.
Mr. Hembry, not knowing what was going on, walked out into his front yard to basically say, "What is going on out here? What's all this noise?" He was shot.
Gary Hembry's body was riddled with 17 bullet wounds. He was the only one shot that many times, so it really seemed like he was the primary target.
The multiple wounds in this particular case would clearly suggest to me, based on my experience, rage, anger. I think what you had here was a combination of calculated malice mixed with rage.
But who could have hated Gary enough to open fire on him and his neighbors? Roger's son Justin tells investigators he knows exactly who the shooter was.
Justin was able to identify the shooter to police. His name was Billy Woodward. He lived right across the street. And Justin was absolutely certain because he told cops he had come face to face with him during the incident.
Mr. Woodward looked at him, and Justin said, "Don't shoot me, don't shoot me."
He also has a good idea why Billy did it.
According to families of the victims, the attack was the result of a long brewing feud in the neighborhood.
Police had been called to the neighborhood multiple times as a result of this dispute. This particular case escalated and became deadly.
Coming up, detectives learn how a simple argument turned a pair of neighbors into sworn enemies.
The harassment and the abusive conduct went literally off the charts.
Detectives in Titusville, Florida, are investigating a neighborhood shooting spree that left Gary Hembry dead and his two friends in critical condition. Witnesses have identified 44-year-old Billy Woodward as the man with the gun.
What police do know at this point in the investigation is that the families had been squabbling numerous times over the past few months.
Professionally, I've dealt with disputes between neighbors before, but nothing that ever escalated anywhere near to this, nowhere near this.
What investigators want to know is, what made Billy Woodward take the feud to such an extreme?
Billy grew up here in Titusville. He was born in New York, but he's always lived here.
Billy was the oldest of two boys, and he had what you'd call a fairly stable middle-class upbringing.
After high school, Billy enlisted in the Army. While stationed in Japan, he almost died as the result of an accident.
He was tasked with building a gazebo for a superior officer for some event, and he's working on top of this gazebo, which breaks, and he does a header about 12 feet up into concrete.
He had a fractured skull. His spinal fluid was leaking. He ended up with meningitis because the spinal fluid was leaking out of his head. It damaged the nerves in one ear, so he is completely deaf in one ear.
After he recovered, he was reassigned to Saudi Arabia during Operation Desert Shield.
Billy did not see combat, but his base was subjected to several Scud missile attacks. In 1990, he finished his 4-year tour and decided not to re-enlist, but he was honorably discharged.
Billy was 23 when he returned home to Titusville and met the woman who would become his wife.
It was the best surprise. He and I just hit it off really well. We had moved in together before the end of the year. We got married on September the 4th in 1999.
To begin their new life together, Billy and Barbara bought a home on Smith Drive.
That house was really affordable, and we liked the neighborhood. We liked the school district it was in.
Over the next 8 years, they had 2 children, 1 girl, 1 boy, and it seemed like the perfect little family.
He was trained as a machinist, so he really didn't have trouble finding a job. He ended up working at the Space Center.
In 2001, things started to look rather dark for this seemingly perfect little family. Billy started suffering severe anxiety and depression, all because of his time in Iraq.
He did start going to the VA. He got registered, started seeing a doctor there. He had some testing done. They diagnosed him with PTSD and bipolar disorder.
But things seemed to get a little better when their new next-door neighbors moved in.
We met Gary Hembry when he first moved into his house. He was painting, fixing it up, fixing up the yard. We thought, great, these are going to be great neighbors.
We would play video games with his kids, play in the backyard, on the swing set, just did a lot of stuff together.
As the children played together and got closer, so too did Gary and Billy. And Gary was fully aware of Billy's PTSD. He even tried to help him through that.
We tried several different things to try and on our end, to try and combat the PTSD. We tried having a dog several different times, but we just couldn't find the dog that was right for our family. So he and my daughter went to the feed store one day. I don't remember why they went to the feed store, but they came home with 4 chickens.
He definitely went all out for them. He built them their own whole 2-story house thing, and he spent a lot of time with them.
But after 10 years in the same neighborhood, everything changed in August of that year. Family members say the feud started over a birthday present.
A family friend had driven by, stopped, and left a gift on the front porch. Well, mysteriously, that gift just disappeared.
We spoke on the phone the next day, and she said, did the girls like the cake pops? And I said, well, I'm sorry, we didn't receive that.
The Woodwards would come to find out through other children in the neighborhood that it was Gary's daughter, Destiny, who stole that gift on the front porch.
Destiny took that present to a friend's house down the road and shared it with some other kids. Other kids saw it.
Mr. Woodward apparently confronted Mr. Hembry, accused their daughter of stealing these packages.
Gary is so incensed by this whole situation that he decides to retaliate. He calls authorities and reports that Billy Woodward is keeping a chicken coop in his backyard.
Apparently, Mr. Woodward was not maintaining these chickens within the ordinance. So the next thing happened, chickens had to be removed anyway. One thing leads to another.
He loved them. They were therapeutic. It was something that helped him calm himself, get through tough time periods. He's a proud guy.
The Blakes and the Peachors both took Gary's side in the dispute, and the bad blood continued to grow.
They would stand out in their yard, which is, close to our yard, of course, and just yell at us obscenities and making fun, just irritating harassment.
But given Billy's psychological issues, the Hembrys were playing with fire.
You've got a war veteran with brain damage and PTSD. It's not surprising he might take things to the next level.
They had photographs on their phone cameras, of him sitting in his chair, his lawn chair out in his front yard, dressed like this, giving them the finger.
He told them, I'm going to wait till you all go to sleep, and I'm going to come in and kill all of you, including the kids and dogs.
And Billy eventually installed a camera.
He had out in front of his house mounted a camera which recorded both audio and video. And he had directed it so that you could see just to the back edge of the Hembry house.
The hostilities did not end. In fact, it got worse. So bad that both sides decided to go to court and ask for protective orders. The judge used his discretion and said, nope, go home, figure it out. He denied the injunction.
The judge said, you all just need to play nice.
But that wouldn't happen. Just 5 days after that hearing, Billy made good on his threats. Coming up, with one man dead and 2 others clinging to life, investigators get the other side of the story.
This was a man who had just been pushed too far to the brink.
It becomes a point where you're almost a prisoner in your own home.
In the early morning hours of September 3rd, 2012, detectives arrest Billy Woodward for the shooting of Gary Hembry, Roger Pichor, and Bruce Blake. He is surprisingly calm.
After it was over, William Woodward went back to his front lawn and sat down and waited for the cops to arrive.
He didn't put up a fight or threaten the officer in any way. He told him that it's done, they can't hurt us anymore, and he went peacefully with the police officer.
Billy confesses to the shooting, but according to him, it had been an act of self-defense.
We've been tormented for the last month by these people. I'm a combat veteran with brain damage, and I just snapped. I couldn't take it anymore. They declared war on me, and I'm a soldier. And soldiers fight to win. So I ended it tonight.
His entire premise was that he was a combat veteran who had suffered traumatic brain injury and suffered from PTSD, and he was back on the battlefield.
I think that this was a man who snapped, who had just been pushed too far to the brink.
Billy said it all began when Gary betrayed his friendship.
Things are now at an impasse. Billy's decided that his daughter can no longer go over and play at Gary's house. And what was worse in Billy's mind was the way that Gary handled the accusations that his daughter stole the gift.
When we went to confront Gary that morning on August 5th, it was a Sunday, I believe, he just got all bent out of shape and exploded on me.
Now it seems like a game of tit for tat. Gary calling the authorities to complain about Billy's chicken coop, which sets the whole chain of events in motion.
We've had the chickens for 2 years now, and all of our neighbors have loved it. We share eggs when they come to visit, and when everybody brings their kids over for like a little pet zoo.
Nice.
So when I saw him out there taking pictures of my property, I just went over the deep end. That happens when I get pushed.
That seemed to be the start. It really broke everything apart, and it just escalated, and, no one was adult enough to stop it.
Billy says the 3 families had banded against him, waging an ongoing war of harassment, and it had all been captured on the surveillance camera he installed.
And this is all recorded on my surveillance at home.
Carrie Blake actually told Mrs. Woodward that she was going to hire people to sodomize the Woodward's 12-year-old daughter. I mean, that's the level of vitriol that was coming from the victims.
I don't know any normal, decent person that could look at the behavior of this group and not be appalled by it.
They continued to harass him and his family daily, and so it becomes a point where you're almost a prisoner in your own home.
We were actually trying to find another house by this point to move out of the neighborhood. We just wanted out.
My wife has just been a nervous wreck ever since she started this. I mean, she cries all the time. That's what drove me over the edge, was seeing the stress on my family.
Billy says that on the day of the shooting, he and his wife took their children to the local pool. When they returned, the Hembry barbecue was in full swing, and Billy's surveillance camera was capturing it all.
With the amount of alcohol involved, it was really loud. It was crazy. There was people everywhere. It was loud. They were lighting stuff on fire.
Over the course of the hours from 9 to midnight, they periodically go to the street, start hollering at Mr. Woodward.
They were very clearly directing taunts, slanders, abuse at Mr. Woodward's home.
Billy was nervous, just as I was. It just seemed like things were a lot busier and louder, and it just seemed crazier than usual.
All of this would have been unsettling for just about anyone. But for a guy like Billy with PTSD, well, you can imagine why it set him off. And if it was war that Gary wanted, it was war he was going to get.
Around 11 p.m., after Barbara went to bed, Billy put on his military gear and loaded his Beretta.
I went out my back gate. I immediately went into what the military calls a crouching stance.
Okay.
And I used my truck for cover so they couldn't see my movement.
Then, for the next 20 minutes, he slowly maneuvered into position.
I remember crawling inches at a time and listening to him taunting and yelling across the street. Your mom's a fucking bitch. You dickhead. We're gonna fuck you up. It's all on surveillance. You can actually hear and see for yourself what they did tonight.
I think that he had 3 targets in mind. He saw Bruce, Roger, and Gary as his biggest threats.
Coming up, the final assault.
This is war to me. This is not murder. This is killing the enemy.
"44-year-old Billy Woodward is in the middle of a confession about the shooting of his 3 neighbors, Gary Hembry, Roger Pichor, and Bruce Blake.
Based on the statements he made to the police the night of the crime, he was a combat veteran who had suffered a traumatic brain injury, suffered from PTSD.
The neighbors knew that he had PTSD issues. They knew he had mental health issues. And they harassed him anyway.
It just drove me into a rage. I was already over the edge, and I just couldn't control myself.
So what did you do next?
I kept on crawling.
Okay.
I was on a military mission. I was going to end this war.
How long did you sit there and listen to them when they were shouting?
For minutes. I waited for the lights to go out. When you hunt down an enemy, patience is a virtue.
Then finally, he made his move.
When I got to the corner of the house is when I charged. I know as a soldier that when you engage your enemy, you have to have the element of surprise.
You can see on the surveillance tape a figure emerges from the darkness. It's Billy with a Beretta.
I shot Roger in the torso. He slumped to the ground. I heard Bruce Blake say something. I followed him to his garage. He tried to go inside the door. I put rounds into his torso until he slumped to the ground. Gary Hembry come out of his garage and said, "What the hell's going on out here?" And I put one dead center of his chest. He slumped to the ground. I walked past Roger, who was writhing in pain, and I shot Gary Hembry twice in the head.
This may have seemed like the actions of a madman, but really, in Billy's mind, he was just following the rules of engagement, which is why he didn't shoot Justin Pichor.
He very much was looking at this as a battlefield. Women and children are non-combatants.
In Billy's mind, This was not murder. In Billy's mind, these men were dangerous, and he was going to do anything necessary to keep himself and his family safe.
It was Piccior, it was Blake, it was Hembry. Those three were the threat. He went to address the threat.
However, the more Billy tries to defend his actions, the more police question his mental health.
I don't deserve to go to jail for this. Those sorry motherfuckers deserve to go to jail for what they did to me and my family for the last month. And these people fucked with me and fucked with me and fucked with me and fucked with me and fucked with me.
It would be difficult for me to say that he was in the right state of mind at any point in this whole situation because of the emotional stress, the PTSD, his brain injury.
While investigators are working out how to proceed, they receive more bad news. Roger Pichor is dead.
After Billy shot him in the chest, he went back and fired one more time through his head, and that was the bullet that ultimately killed him.
Despite his severe injuries and damage to multiple organs, Bruce Blake is the lone survivor.
Bruce Blake was the only one of the three to live through the night. He was in rehabilitation for a few weeks, and then he was released.
Now, instead of one murder, Billy is indicted for 2.
2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted first-degree murder.
Prosecutors have surveillance tape. They even have a confession. But the question is, will Billy be able to stand trial given his mental state at the time of the shooting?
We had him examined, and he was mentally fit to stand trial. Florida has a pretty low threshold. If you can understand what's going on and you can talk clearly to your lawyer and hear and understand what you're hearing and seeing in the courtroom, then you're good to go.
However, Billy pleads not guilty to all charges.
I extended plea offers to him. His attorney came back with me and said, he doesn't want your plea offer. And I said, well, is there anything he's willing to plead to? And his attorney said, the only thing he's willing to do is have you drop the charges and give him the gun back. And I said, that's, of course, ridiculous.
We talked to all the neighbors involved. They were more than happy to come talk to us because they had stories to tell about what had happened to Billy at the hands of these folks.
What all have you personally seen? I have witnessed harassment on Billy and all of his family. I've heard threats of things they're going to do to his family, and us ourselves have been threatened by those 2 houses.
The question was, would it be enough to exonerate him? Coming up, Billy Woodward takes the stand in his own defense.
You could tell he was getting angry as he was sort of reliving what had happened.
Billy Woodward has been charged with murdering his 2 neighbors, Gary Hembry and Roger Pichor. But even though he's confessed to the shooting, there's a chance the case might not go to trial.
Florida has something called the Stand Your Ground law. And essentially that means if your life is in danger or you feel your life is in danger, you have the right to kill someone in self-defense.
The pretrial motion in a Stand Your Ground is a request to have someone granted immunity from prosecution.
At the hearing, the court heard Billy's claims of the intense harassment his family suffered and the resulting fear it caused.
They torment us day and night. They stalk us, they harass us. They've threatened us in ways you would not even imagine.
As evidence, the defense shows surveillance footage taken in the weeks before the shootings.
Goddamn plastic G.I. Joe! Fuck you and your mother!
We showed a Facebook picture or I think it was Roger Piccior, with an assault weapon, pointed at the camera. Billy clearly felt that these people were not only armed, but heavily armed.
Billy claims his neighbors were also planning to use more exotic weapons to attack his family.
Because I didn't know if that was a Molotov cocktail that would come through and into my house.
You can certainly see on the video that something of significance was burned while they were chanting such things as KKK and White Power and Burn Baby Burn.
However, the state argues that none of Billy's claims are true.
On cross-examination, I got him to admit that before he even went out of his house and started crawling across there, he realized that whatever that was not a Molotov cocktail.
Still, Billy insists that he'd been left with no choice but to act that night.
War had been declared upon my house and family for myself. Now I'm the only living left because I like the children and live with them. Do you not understand that, sir?
After a week-long hearing, the judge announces his decision. He denies Billy's claim of immunity and declares that his actions are not in line with stand your ground or exercising self-defense.
No matter how reprehensible, disgusting, obnoxious, and vile the threats or the conduct, taunting by the victims, they didn't deserve to die. That was the essence of this case.
At trial, the state presents harrowing eyewitness testimony from the families of the victims, including Bruce Blake, the only one of Billy's targets to survive the ambush.
Gary come outside to see what was going on, and he run right straight up on Billy, and Billy just started shooting. And he come back over to me, shot me 4 or 5 more times. Then he went back and shot Roger once.
This was a revenge killing. I cannot come up with any other reasonable explanation based on what I know.
This time, Billy does not testify in his own defense. Instead, his attorneys rely on his wife, Barbara, to convince the jury.
Gary said that she would rape my daughter. She said that she would have all the neighbors participate. And then she would burn down my house. I can still hear their voices screaming at me. I did try to speak directly to them. I wanted to impress upon them the kind person that Billy is. He didn't just decide, I'm going to go shoot these people. I believe that he did what was necessary to protect himself and our family.
However, the jury doesn't agree.
We, the jury, find this follows that to count 1 of the charge. Defendant William Theodore Woodward is guilty of second-degree murder, discharge of firearm causing death.
Over 6 years after the deadly shootout, he is found guilty of both second-degree murder charges and of attempted second-degree murder. For his crimes, Billy is given 2 life sentences. The decision would continue to create controversy.
I was absolutely stunned. I could not believe that this jury could find someone guilty of protecting their family.
Whether he was a cold-blooded killer or a tortured veteran who brought the war home with him, one thing was clear. 4 families had been torn apart forever.
I would trade places with her any day. If I could go see Gary in her cell, she should be lucky that she could still see him. No, I can't see him. I can't hug him.
In this case, you have no winners. I really felt badly for Woodward and his family, but you also have to feel for the people who died and who had families and children, and it could have just all been avoided, and which is the real tragic part of this whole thing.
They were a kind-hearted couple with big plans for the future.
They were going to remodel the house that they had lived in, sell it, and move on. They were, I guess probably a good term would be urban pioneers.
Until a clash with a new neighbor put an end to their dreams.
Any little thing would set something off between them.
There was no love lost there, but no one could have imagined it would go this far.
But was it just a rivalry gone wrong? Or the beginning of something far more dangerous?
This really is the unimaginable. You don't move into a home waiting to find a nightmare.
May 18th, 1999. It's a quiet night in the Denver, Colorado suburbs. Until 9 p.m., when a single gunshot rings out on Humboldt Street. Two neighbors, 27-year-old Deborah Loisel and 36-year-old Beverly Grant, both hear it.
I was in the kitchen, and 2 seconds later I heard a pop like a firecracker, and I ran out of the house.
I'm talking to my sister, so I put my phone down. Go outside. There's nothing outside. It's just eerie, just silence and stillness. I said, Deborah, did you hear that sound? And she comes running forward. She goes, I did hear that.
Parked in the street is a truck belonging to Deborah's boyfriend, Jason Horsley. And as Deborah approaches it, her worst nightmares come true.
Jason Horsley is laying inside his vehicle. His legs are sticking outside and he's twitching. She goes up, sees he's shot.
My boyfriend was in his truck. He couldn't breathe.
She just starts screaming and yelling. By then, our neighbors are pouring out of the house, so I start directing them, call 911, call 911.
But Jason has already lost a lot of blood, and there's no telling whether paramedics will arrive in time to save him.
I ran into the house, found the keys. I thought I was going driving down here because the hospitals were so close.
Other neighbors came out, and they drove Jason Horsley to the hospital at the end of the street.
The question on everybody's mind was why. This was a nice couple and a nice neighborhood. No one would ever expect anything like this to happen.
25-year-old Jason Horsley was raised over 400 miles away in the small town of Sheridan, Wyoming.
Jason was, like most kids, very active in this community. He was into fishing, snowboarding, hiking. He was a wrestler. He was in the National Honor Society. I mean, he was really kind of a natural-born leader.
After high school, Jason moved west to attend Pacific University in Forest Grove, Oregon.
This is really a formative time for a lot of people, and Jason was smart, he did well, but what he really liked was working with his hands.
When he was finished with college, Jason decided to pursue a career in carpentry.
By this time in Denver, the city was booming. There were lots of construction jobs available, and because Jason spoke Spanish fluently, he was able to become a foreman. It appeared everybody liked Jason. I mean, he was a man's man, really the kind of guy you could always count on.
Those qualities also made Jason very popular with the women of Oregon, especially Deborah Loisel.
Jason was a good-looking guy. He had lots going for him. He really had no trouble in the woman department. But when he met Deborah, he knew that there was just something special there. Jason and Deborah's relationship really kind of developed quickly. They both wanted to live in Colorado, so they loaded up their 2 dogs and moved to Denver.
The young couple quickly settled on a house in the up-and-coming neighborhood of City Park West.
The neighborhood that Jason and Deborah moved into was a segregated community back in the 40s and 50s, but at this point it had started to gentrify. Humboldt Street is still kind of in the early stages of gentrification, So the property values there are really low, and they were kind of able to get a house for pretty cheap.
They were, I guess probably a good term would be urban pioneers. They were going to remodel the house that they had lived in, sell it, and move on and continue to do that in a neighborhood.
Jason and Deborah quickly became friends with the other families in the area.
Jason got his job in construction, and he was really popular in the neighborhood because if anything broke in your house or you needed help fixing something, he was always there to help.
I did own 3 properties on that block. I lived in one of my houses, and I had 2 others rented out. Jason was the friendliest guy. When I'd have yard parties, they'd come over. So we shared a lot of good times together.
But the good times wouldn't last forever. A little over 2 years later, Jason has been shot outside their house on Humboldt Street. And as Deborah rushes him to the hospital, Denver police are tasked with finding out who did it.
The area that they moved into was a nice area, but it hadn't always been that way. The city of Denver encouraged development in that area because they were trying to build it up and they wanted to make it a nicer, safer community.
In 1985, when I was a young detective, it was certainly a different neighborhood. A lot of gang members and crack cocaine was sold from the houses there.
So the house that Jason and Deborah bought had been previously seized by a drug warrant. And so because they didn't know who shot Jason initially, they were wondering whether or not his shooting was somehow connected with the previous owner who'd lost that house.
Coming up, investigators discover that not everyone loved Jason Horsley.
She wouldn't stop. She was in my face. She looked like she was about to hit me.
"25-year-old Jason Horsley has been rushed to the hospital by his girlfriend Deborah after she found him shot outside their home.
Even though neighbors had heard the shot and had gotten to Jason within moments of the shooting, he was bleeding profusely, and time was of the essence.
They took him to the emergency room, which is no more than 3 blocks from where the shooting happened. The ambulance entrance is you can see it from his house.
Doctors work quickly to save Jason's life, but they are too late.
He was pronounced dead at the hospital.
Dr. Henry from our coroner's office believed that he was probably dead instantly. Bullet went through his back, went through his heart, and exited his body.
Based on the personal and targeted nature of the crime, investigators rule out any connection to the home's previous owners and drug seizure.
The forensics show that there was stippling on the skin, which is usually an indication that the individual was shot at a very close range. Stippling is just when you have on the skin, you'll have small marks and burns that are caused from the actual gunpowder from that round being discharged from the weapon. And because it's so close to the skin, the powder actually contacts the skin and causes this burning effect.
Nothing seemed to have been stolen from Jason or his truck.
The truck was used to get Jason to the hospital that night, and after that it was basically towed from the hospital to the impound lot where a search warrant was conducted on that truck.
Detectives are hoping Deborah might be able to give them some answers.
Deborah was obviously upset, but she still seemed eager to help the police.
Why don't we start by just telling me the events, what happened this evening?
My boyfriend and I arrived home from walking our dogs down by the river. I don't know what time that was. And he said, I'm going to clean up my truck.
Jason was a carpenter. He had a lot of tools. So every night his practice was to take them, every single one out, and repack his truck. Because he'd leave 4 or 5 in the morning. His truck was like his workshop. So by the end of the day, it's just thrown in there. But he took the time meticulously every evening to do that.
According to Deborah, Jason would pull his truck up and park on the street really anywhere there was a space closest to their home. And on this particular day, he parked his truck in front of Malika Griffin's house.
According to Deborah, Malaika is exactly who she thinks may be responsible for the shooting.
And how about this lady that we're talking about, the next door neighbor?
I've only seen her in the last month. I didn't meet her for a minute.
Describe her for me.
She's about my height, so I'd say 5'4". A black woman with a short afro. She's probably pretty young. I would say 23 or 24. And stocky.
Deborah tells police that shortly before the shooting occurred, she heard Malaika arguing with Jason.
I went in the backyard to water the grass. She has a gate that you can always hear when she's going and coming close, and then I heard, talking.
Malika come out and kicked this stuff and told him to get it off of her sidewalk, and he couldn't park his car in front of her damn house.
He was saying, I don't know, leave me alone, whatever, and she was saying, you're a faggot, you suck dick, something like that. And then I came out and I said, this is city right away, he has the right to be here.
Deborah says Jason left to get their neighbor Beverly, who was also Malaika's landlord. But Deborah and Malaika continued to argue.
Jason came to me a bit before the shooting happened because his girlfriend and Malaika were engaged in a kind of heated argument. Things kind of got out of hand and just really escalated into ugliness.
She was in my face, and I was like, you need help. I'm sorry you feel angry at the world or whatever's going on in your life. You've gotten along with everyone. I don't know what your problem is. She looked like she was about to hit me. I said, I'm going to call the police if you hit me and file charges against you.
Malika had a roommate named John. And at that point, he came outside and began to usher her back into the house. It seemed to blow over quickly. Malika went back inside of her home, and Jason went back to organizing the tools in his truck.
But a little while later, both Deborah and Beverly heard the gunshot and came running back outside.
Deborah indicated as soon as she heard that loud noise, she thought it was a gunshot and immediately came outside. And unfortunately, what she thought was a gunshot turned out to be true.
Now, when you went back outside, Jason was in the truck. Did he say anything to you?
No, he couldn't speak to breathe. He just said...
And then someone came out then?
All the neighbors started.
All the neighbors
started screaming, she shot him.
So the police learned that Malika and Jason and Deborah had this fight, and so they looked at her, but at the same time, it begged the question, why would you kill someone over parking in front of your house?
It's incomprehensible that an argument over tools could lead to a murder.
Deborah doesn't know whether Malaika owns a weapon, but she tells investigators that this isn't the first time they'd had problems with their new neighbor.
Turns out that there's a history of bad blood between these two women, and it turns out that it's over Deborah's two dogs.
But had an angry neighbor really resorted to murder? Coming up, a neighborhood argument quickly escalates out of control.
Any little thing would set something off between them.
It's been less than 2 hours since Jason Horsley was shot and killed by an unknown assailant. His girlfriend Deborah believes it was their next-door neighbor, Malaika Griffin.
According to Deborah, they had a history of confrontation with Malika, and Deborah described Malika as an angry young woman.
The first conversation I had with her was about a month ago. I was digging a hole for a tree in my front yard, and she was walking by, and I made sure my dogs were on the front porch.
Their dogs had a reputation for being unruly. They would charge on people, and they're the friendliest things, but one is huge, and their barks are convincing.
She came right up to the fence by my yard. My dog approached the fence and was barking at her. He's protective of the house, and he's protective of me.
Those were like her babies, in a sense. And they were harmless, but if you don't know them, you don't know that. She goes, "Hey, lady, hold your dogs." I mean, natural response. You were startled.
You got a situation where Malika and this dog just aren't used to each other. And I think in most normal circumstances, people would just let something like that go.
But according to Deborah, her new neighbor wasn't interested in resolving things peacefully.
Malika told Deb, if those dogs get into my yard, I'm going to kill them.
I said, well, you're stupid for taunting him. Why would you come over to the fence if you saw, you know my dog, if he's lived there.
Deborah called Malika stupid, and Malika reacted very violently and angrily to being called stupid. And I think that really shook Deborah up.
She told her straight out, "If you punch me, I'm going to call the cops." At that point, Malika said, "I don't do prison, bitch. Wait here," and went inside the house.
After that, I was bawling, crying in my front yard. So I've never had something like that happen to me before.
Deborah said she spoke to Malika's landlord, Beverly, about the incident, but decided not to make the problem worse.
Eventually, Deborah just decided to chalk it all up to a misunderstanding, and she really never talked to Malika after that.
However, the problem didn't go away. Instead of arguing with Deborah, Malika began turning her anger towards Jason.
She wants to fight with us once he was fixing the gutters. And she just says constantly, you gotta pick up your trash, you gotta pick up the trash, and he's adjusting the gutters. He didn't have anything on.
It seemed like Malika had a serious temper, but that didn't mean she was capable of murder.
Detectives knock on Malika's door, hoping to get her side of the story. But she isn't home.
The police interviewed the landlord across the street, Beverly Grant, and according to Miss Grant, the real tension was between Malika and Deborah, and Jason really didn't have anything to do with it.
According to Beverly, both women seemed to be equally at fault for the bad blood between them.
Deborah would light into anyone that said anything about the dogs. Jason came to my door, knocked, and said, "Bev, they're out here arguing. Could you come out here and intercede?" So I did. And when I got there, I just heard the most horrible things coming out of Deborah's mouth.
Beverly Grant told the police that she had tried to play mediator between these two women, but it really didn't help. They just hated each other.
Deborah and Malika had such a contentious relationship. You know, any little thing would set something off.
But Beverly found it hard to believe Malika was the sort of person who'd commit murder.
I had a coffee shop at that time, and she frequented my coffee shop. I was impressed with her because she loved seniors, and I noticed that she talked to all the seniors that were there and had great conversations around academia and progressive issues.
Malika Griffin was extremely smart. She had a degree in chemistry. She graduated with honors.
Over about a 2-month period of knowing her, I learned she lived in a hostel. Then in talking, I had an opening it for a room in a house, and it was shared with another man, and she had no problems. Just so happened that what I was going to be charging her was just slightly less than what she was paying at the hostel.
So Malika got a job at a local pharmacy. She moved in with John, and outside of her conflict with Deborah, she seemed to kind of get along with everybody.
She had a warm personality, engaging. She was a model tenant as far as that goes, kept her place very clean.
A routine background check seems to confirm Beverly's opinion of Malika.
What she had to her advantage was the fact that she had no criminal history. We didn't have her fingerprints on record.
There was nothing, no red flags with her activities with neighbors or how she worked. I mean, she functioned well in society.
At that point, it doesn't look like she's going to be a suspect after all.
Coming up, another neighbor comes forward with new information that changes everything.
It looked like she was going to war. The question was, with who?
Denver police are investigating the murder of 25-year-old Jason Horsley. His girlfriend, Deborah, believes their neighbor, Malaika Griffin, is responsible. But detectives aren't sure the model tenant could be capable of homicide.
Malaika's background was pretty average. She didn't have a criminal history. By all accounts, interviews of her family and friends growing up, she was a pretty normal girl, did well in school.
Detectives canvass the neighborhood and they find a witness that says that they saw Malaika Griffin running down the street moments after the shooting.
Detectives immediately return to Malaika's house to speak to her roommate.
Police interview Malaika's roommate, John, and John told them that after the fight Malaika had with Deborah, she came in and she seemed fine. John said that she left while he was watching TV. She had on a red jacket, she had her backpack, and she seemed fine. Nothing seemed unusual about it.
John agrees to let investigators search their home, and what they find is surprising.
Inside her room was a small single bed, a dresser, and then a small closet. The only thing she had in her closet was no clothes, was a 9mm caliber high-point rifle, fully loaded.
The carbine rifle was also equipped with a high-capacity magazine that was loaded with hollow point bullets. This is similar to the weapon that was used in the Columbine massacre that had happened just a month prior. So this is huge.
But that's not all they discover.
Inside her dresser drawer were 2 hand grenades, and the fuse packs were intact, so we backed out of there and called the bomb squad.
It looked like Malaika was going to war. The question was, with who?
Her roommate had no idea that she had hand grenades or a gun in her closet in there.
While specialists secure the dangerous arsenal, detectives speak to another neighbor named Gabriel Pierce. He claims Malaika asked him for help moments after the shooting.
Malaika was his aunt's friend. She pounded on the back door, was breathing heavy, and said that she was in trouble. She needed to get rid of this. Lifted up her jacket and could see a large semi-automatic pistol.
She said, "I just killed somebody. Help me get out of here." And when he refused, she fled.
He said, "I don't have nothing to do with that. Get out." She ran out the back alley and took off.
Gabriel had no idea where she went.
When police search the alley behind Gabriel's house, they find a red jacket on top of a dumpster.
The piece of clothing they found was distinctive, and so they knew that it was hers. It was something that would have definitely identified her.
Through the course of canvassing the neighborhood, we found a black backpack. She carried a black backpack with her most of the times that she went.
That backpack belonged to Malaika. It even had her ID in it.
In a few short hours, Malaika Griffin has gone from model tenant to murder suspect. And alongside her stockpile of weaponry, investigators find evidence of a frightening motive.
Police found what appeared to be Malaika's personal handwritten journal.
You could only describe this journal as extremely disturbing, and it really offered readers a glimpse of the real Malaika and who she was on the inside. Because on the outside, you would have never seen any of this. Her journal pages were filled with rage, with hate, and with extreme emotional distress.
Not only did we find some material that certainly is suggestive of terroristic or subversive type of behavior, but she had propaganda posters and things like that in the home as well. And she didn't care much for white people.
The book was almost completely full about an impending race war. And obviously she thought she needed to arm herself for this upcoming confrontation. Her state of mind, I suppose that probably really played into the shooting with Jason Horsley.
She had a huge problem with white people and a huge problem with men. Jason represented everything that Malaika hated.
The evidence brings heightened urgency to the search. As far as police are concerned, their fugitive is armed and incredibly dangerous.
Police found several things in Malika's backpack that suggested it was not going to be easy to take her into custody. She had survival magazines, she had information about how to change your identity, and she also had information about how you could harm police officers.
How to booby trap things, how to snipe police officers, those type of things. Not what I would think we would find in that lady's person.
At one point, when Malika is fighting with Deborah, Malika tells her, "I don't do prison." And it turns out that was not just a threat.
Coming up, the search for Malika Griffin becomes a nationwide manhunt.
There's really no telling how this could escalate.
Just 3 hours after Jason Horsley was murdered outside his Colorado home, investigators have a suspect, 28-year-old Malika Griffin. But so far, they've been unable to locate the volatile fugitive.
Police need to do everything they can to apprehend her immediately. She presents a danger to everybody she encounters. She's going to be desperate. She could hurt somebody again.
Authorities' concern for public safety increases when they learn that Malika threatened another friend into helping her disappear.
She'd continued westbound on 23rd down to the 800 block where she knocked on another acquaintance's door, and that turned out to be Monique Thomas.
Well, why don't you go ahead and start at the beginning and just tell me what happened?
Okay, basically, she came banging on my door and looked out the window and said, "Hey," went down the stairs, opened the door. When I opened the door, I smelled alcohol on her breath, but she was real nervous. She was like, I was like, "What's wrong?" I let her in, and she's like, "I need to use your car." I'm like, "You need to use my car?" "Well, you can't use my car, but I'll take you where you need to go."
When Monique refused to help Malika, she confronted Monique with a gun.
Malika pointed at her and said, "Give me the keys." Monique had her young son in the house. I believe he was 3 or 4 at the time. She certainly didn't want the boy to be involved in any kind of shooting, so she did give her the car keys.
It was serious. And she said, "I don't want to do this. And don't scream, don't call the police." And she unplugged the phone line. Kept looking at her, and she just had that blank stare. And I'm more so, I just couldn't believe it.
Monique tells police that she doesn't know where Malika was going, but she was able to tell them that Malika was driving an older model burgundy sedan.
Investigators immediately put out an alert on the vehicle.
We boloed the information to the metro area. I even went so far as to have our dispatchers contact the state of Nebraska, Kansas, and I think even Illinois, because we had no idea where she was.
She could be headed anywhere. It's nighttime, so they really need to broaden their scope at this point and bring in more resources. And this becomes a really critical point in the investigation.
The next morning, a forensics team begins processing Jason's vehicle for evidence.
I actually found the slug inside his truck and the spent shell. So she had to reach like that with a slide to eject, and the 9mm round, the casing, go inside the truck. The slug went through his body and lodged inside the truck, where we were able to recover it.
Interviews after the crime were committed by one of the witnesses indicated that this was a handgun that had a laser sight on it, and the ballistics from the shooting showed that it was a 9mm handgun.
However, days pass before investigators get another lead.
We had Malika's description, the fact that she was armed with a large caliber 9mm pistol, laser sighted, so we wanted everybody to be aware. I thought she'd probably be stopped before she got out of Colorado. Turned out 3 days later, we were notified by a person in Iowa City, Iowa, that the car was there and the car had died.
Unfortunately, Malika already disappeared again.
A few days after that, police receive word from Malika's mother that she's in Chicago. But once again, Malika seems to be one step ahead of them.
By the time they got there, she'd vanished without a trace.
that was pretty much her last known whereabouts. And so police began to speculate, where could she have gone? And it really was anybody's guess.
At that point, they came to the FBI and requested our assistance. The FBI went to a federal judge and obtained an unlawful flight to avoid prosecution warrant, which we call a UFAP. That UFAP warrant allows the FBI to utilize all of our people and our technology in the hunt for somebody that's gone on the run.
And that's huge, because now this means that Malaika's on everybody's radar.
However, even with multiple law enforcement agencies looking for her, Malaika continues to evade capture. After several months, authorities finally turned to the media for help.
In February of 2000, America's Most Wanted aired this case for the first time. They really wanted to help investigators find Malaika, because it was pretty unusual that at this point she was still on the run.
A UFAP warrant gives us national and international capability, and that's the benefit of a UFAP warrant. Instead of having that state warrant in place, we can actually look anywhere in the United States, and we can utilize our agents that are overseas as well.
We would get calls from everywhere. China, Mexico. I thought maybe she might have made it to Mexico. Someone said that she was taking Spanish classes. Again, very intelligent. If she could speak Spanish, Mexico, Central America, even South America might work for her.
As the months turn into years, investigators begin to lose hope of ever finding Malaika, until they finally get the break they've been looking for.
In June of 2005, America's Most Wanted aired the story for the 9th time. And once again, tips flooded the hotline. But this time, there was a special tip.
I received a telephone call from a previous supervisor. I had worked in the San Diego division, and I knew the individual that was calling me. He said that their division had received a really good tip for Malaika. And normally when we get tips, I'm not too confident that it's going to pan out. However, I knew this individual, and he felt like it was a credible lead. So that night began the process. We confirmed that the UFAP was still in place, and they started doing their investigation in San Diego.
Someone called to say that they recognized the woman on their television screen and that she matched the description of a coworker, someone who just so happened to be working at a biotech company. She was going by the name Blake Griffin.
Coming up, investigators finally catch up with their suspect. And this time, they're not taking any chances.
A tactical unit wearing bulletproof vests were the first to go in.
Over 6 years after the murder of Jason Horsley in Denver, Colorado, detectives have cornered their suspect, Malaika Griffin, 1,000 miles away in San Diego. Given her history and arsenal of weaponry, they've come prepared.
The Violent Crime Squad set up surveillance on an address that she had provided as a residence. And after about 2.5 hours, they were able to confirm that an individual matching Malaika's description was actually in that residence.
A tactical unit wearing bulletproof vests were the first to go in. They weren't taking any chances. Malaika was considered armed and dangerous.
But as difficult as Malaika had been to find, her arrest is easy.
The Violent Crime Squad, with some SWAT operators, set up on that residence, knocked on the door, and Malaika answered the door and was immediately placed into custody.
She didn't put up a fight. However, she wouldn't reveal her identity.
In June 2005, Malaika Griffin is extradited to Colorado to face charges of first-degree murder and aggravated robbery. On February 27, 2006, her trial begins.
At the trial, prosecutors argued that Malaika left the fight with Deborah and Jason, went into her house, and came back with a gun, which meant that this was a premeditated act. Considering her radical beliefs, Malaika's motive was clear.
They described her as a dangerous, extreme militant. fighting against the world, essentially.
Prosecutors were able to show the jury the weapons and her subversive books, but the most damning evidence against her was Malika's own journal.
Prosecutors argue that even though Malika didn't know Jason Horsley, he represented everything she hated most.
This was a white couple moving into a predominantly African American neighborhood, and you could look at this as gentrification at its worst.
He was disturbing the place that she called home. In her journal, she's describing a guy just like him as an oppressor. So it's easy to imagine that he quickly became a target.
On March 2nd, 2006, Malika takes the stand to tell the jury her side of the story.
Malika claimed that after the argument with Jason and Deborah, she went back into her house just to get her backpack. She really just needed some time to cool off. She grabbed her bag, and in her bag was a gun that she carried a long time without any incident. A single woman carrying a gun, she's living in a big city, so I don't think it's strange that she would carry a gun with her. After her fight with Deborah, Malika saw Jason go back to his truck, and she claimed that she thought he was going to get a weapon.
According to Malika, she shot Jason in self-defense. But prosecutors argue that Jason's wounds prove otherwise.
Based on the trajectory through the body and the nearness of the muzzle to Jason's back, he was not in a position where he could offer any kind of physical threat.
Jason was leaning inside of his truck with, he couldn't even see who was behind him. The only thing exposed was his back and his legs. She walked up, aimed her large caliber 9mm pistol with a laser sight, put it right in the middle of his back and pulled the trigger.
When confronted with her journal, Malika tries to pass it off as a work of fiction.
It was her position that she was going to write something and that what she was going to write was going to have a positive spin on it.
She said that she was simply writing a play. However, it was very easy for prosecutors to poke holes in that defense.
I don't believe it was a manuscript. I think it was a manifesto of hate.
The jury seems to agree. On March 6th, 2006, after 8 hours of deliberation, they find Malika guilty on all charges.
She was very, very angry with the white race. Jason happened to be a white male, and I don't know what, if she just snapped that night, something made her go. I truly think that the fiance, Deborah Loisel, is probably very happy that she went inside when she did. I truly believe Malika came out to shoot her. Not that she wouldn't have shot Jason also, but I think her intent was truly to shoot Deborah.
She was given a mandatory sentence of life in prison without parole, and on top of that, she was sentenced to another 10 years consecutive for the aggravated robbery.
Our objective in any homicide case is to bring justice to the victim because they can no longer speak for themselves. We become that victim's voice. We felt that we had that success here.
A young woman's misguided hatred had ended in tragedy for both the family of the victim and their community.
This really is the unimaginable. You don't move into a home waiting to find a nightmare. You move into your home to find a dream. And unfortunately, it didn't turn out that way for Jason and Deb.
When you're dealing with somebody that you don't truly know, somebody that has argued with you in the past over trivial things, you never know what they're capable of.
It's more than a story to me. I knew Jason and he was a friend. And that's kind of the relationship that we may have had to the present day didn't get to happen. He didn't get to have kids, things like that. When I have the opportunity to encounter neighbors, of course that comes up in our reminiscing because it was a surreal tragedy.